antecedents. What else?
Motivating
Motivating operations. So we're going to talk about a little bit of both of those tonight. So, and then they threw some other things in there that I'm not quite sure why they put in the chapter, but hey, whatever. So, all right. So in regards to antecedent stimuli situations, we have our descriptive stimulus, which who wants to prompt me on what this is again, because I totally forgot.
It's like extinction.
The presence of something.
Descriptive stimulus?
No. I'm thinking the other. I'm thinking of Delta. I'm thinking of
Presence of
Delta.
something.
That's, it signals availability.
Availability
Okay.
or something.
Yep. So a stimuli that signals availability for a behavior. So, and then motivating operation?
That's the,
EO or AO.
that's
EO or
what makes
AO.
something valuable.
All right, so it changes the value of that reinforcer or punisher. All right, so, the SD evokes behaviors due to the correlation of a stimulus to an increased availability of reinforcement. So we said the availability. And then it can be manipulated through, whoa, really? Can be manipulated through manipulating, that's some bad typing right there.
Okay, you have to take a time out and fix it, and then we'll come back when you're ready.
Do you need some time? Is that what you're telling me? And so this can be manipulated and makes that reinforcement makes the presence or absence of that reinforcer or punisher available, and you emit that behavior. Motivating operations. So obviously independent of the availability of the reinforcement. So doesn't necessarily apply to the SD, but it does change the value of that reinforcer and of course the current frequency of whether a behavior will happen due to getting that reinforcer. So for example, being hungry, food is more appealing. So that's all a quick little review. So, so in regards to the antecedent interventions, there's typically two types of functions, what we call contingency dependent and contingency independent. So, hopefully I don't break those down any further on that slide. So, the contingency dependent is dependent on the consequences of the behavior for developing some sort of evocative or abative effect. So, this is usually what we call whatever is under the antecedent control. So the example they gave in the book was 2 + 2 equals, and then students will say, oh, it's 4. So it's something that has been reinforced in previous occurrences. So, so it's learned behavior. That's what contingency dependent is. Contingency independent is more of that motivating operation. It's something that you haven't necessarily learned in the past. It's just, wow, I'm hungry. I eat, I'm no longer hungry. You haven't necessarily learned that, you just kind of did it at first. Or when there's a bright light, you just learn to blink when you blink. So, but both of these we can use antecedent interventions to kind of manipulate and hopefully change the outcome of behavior. So, all right. So, one thing the book points out is by themselves, antecedent interventions only produce temporary effects. So we can put these in place and they'll change the behavior while they're in place, but they won't change necessarily long term. So which is why we need to put other operant treatment interventions in place. So like we talked about last week, differential reinforcement. Somehow reinforcing that behavior so the frequency will either increase or decrease in the future. So, make sense? Of course it does. All right. So, and we're going to talk about 3 types of antecedent interventions tonight. Non-contingent reinforcement, which is becoming more and more popular. I see it in the literature a lot more, and it's quite the misnomer. So, what the book calls high probability request sequence, you'll often hear me refer to this more as like behavioral momentum. And then I'm not still haven't figured out exactly why, but they threw functional communication training in there as well, which we talked about some like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I probably won't delve too much into the FCT because I know how much you guys love to get out early. So. All right, so let's start. What?
Oh, I was gonna say, what do we need to reinforce so that happens more often? All right, we're talking money, token system here.
Money is always accepted.
Money is always
I'm not
good.
sure I'll link it to the behavior, but that's okay. I'll take
Green
it.
is good.
Yes.
So, the chaining, is that an antecedent intervention?
Not necessarily. That is more of just breaking down individual behaviors and reinforcing each step to that behavior. So
So it's not,
I wouldn't classify it as an antecedent intervention, no.
but where would I put it, like, on the principles of behavior? Like,
You would typically put that under positive reinforcement
okay.
because the chaining intervention itself is useless unless you're positively reinforcing each step. I mean, I could break a sequence down, but then if I just, did it without interacting with the client, they're never gonna know if they did that step right or wrong. There has to be some sort of feedback to it, so, yeah. So, all right. So non-contingent reinforcements. There's NCR, and you'll hear it referred to a lot of times as NCR, so get used to that acronym. They have NCR with positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and then NCR with automatic reinforcement. Now, one of the interesting things about non-contingent reinforcement, and when we take a look at our graphs, and you'll see this discussed in the literature a lot, this actually is a bit of a misnomer where it's not actually, according to ABA terminology, reinforcement. It actually is a punishment procedure because the behaviors with NCR you're looking to decrease. So that's argued in the literature quite often. When they're looking at maladaptive target behaviors. One of the first graphs we'll look at tonight is actually positive behaviors. But what they were looking at was the compliant behavior in conjunction with, I think it was self-injurious behavior. So, and they use NCR to decrease that, maladaptive behavior. But in all situations, NCR is a decrease in behavior. So
since they're focusing on maladaptive behaviors, they want the behaviors to decrease, and even though they're calling it reinforcement, it's really in reality punishment then.
correct.
And it's never used to increase behavior?
Not typically, because it's usually addressed for like escape behaviors or students trying to get attention in a maladaptive way. So usually when you're looking at it, you're looking at a target behavior that's maladaptive, and you definitely don't want to increase that maladaptive behavior. So, and I can't remember.
Why do they do that?
Yeah, that's what I was just
Why are
trying.
they doing this stuff?
That's why I was just trying to remember who I want. My guess is it probably came out of like clinical psychology. They were like, folks, you got this all wrong. Jab, jab, jab.
I know, I'm ready.
Would it be positive punishment?
You walked into
That
that.
was good, that was good.
It would depend upon which method they're using here. It could be a positive or a negative punishment procedure. So yeah, this one looks really wonky when you're putting the principal behavior. They're using non-contingent reinforcement, but the principal behavior is whatever, positive punishment. So, yeah. So, like I said, one of the first graphs we'll look at, and we're going to look at quite a few graphs tonight, and I'm not going to do all the explaining to the graphs. You guys can do some of that tonight. So, but I'll go through the first one.
Okay.
All right, so most of the graphs we're going to go through are in your book. There's one or two that I threw in there that aren't. So if you have trouble seeing it, it's somewhere in your book, and they're typically in order of the chapter. So, but I'll give you the quick synopsis that I typed in. So this is a non-contingent reinforcement procedure that they used. The target behavior they were looking at was self-injurious behavior and physical aggression. What the therapist theorized is that the maintaining consequence for the maladaptive behaviors was social positive reinforcement. So they were getting attention, or edibles, whatever, from their environment, all right?
For the maladaptive.
For the maladaptive behavior, yeah. So this is the responses, and it could be, there's multiple baseline across individuals. Same intervention procedure, so non-contingent reinforcement. The behaviors themselves, we don't know which one off the graph was doing self-injurious behavior, which was physically aggressive. It might explain in the book, or I know it explains it in the actual article. But what they were interested in is how often this occurs per minute. And you can kind of see that Julia, probably averaging around 4 responses per minute. Good old Susan's up to like 15, so hopefully hers was self-injurious and not physically aggressive. And then Matt was probably on average about 7.
Does it say if it was a fixed interval or fixed ratio?
For that reinforcement,
Establishing
Yeah.
baseline.
since it's a baseline, I would put $100 on that was a variable schedule.
Okay,
Um,
and the intervention, do you think it was?
In the intervention I'm going to talk about,
Oh,
there was a fixed schedule that they used on this.
okay.
So, but in this one, I mean, just reality of you're gonna end up being variable schedule, which obviously what we know about variable schedules is that it helps maintain behaviors and can even increase them. So what they did was they said, oh, let's implement this NCR, and they did it on, they did a fixed time interval.
Okay.
I don't know what they started at, but on my notes, they eventually thinned it to 300, to every 300 seconds. They would give them attention or food, whatever they determined was the maintaining consequence.
Wow.
So
Julia did.
you can see Julia dropped almost immediately.
Yeah.
So Susan definitely dropped. She had a little hiccup there. But Matt dropped immediately, then kind of bounced around for a while. And this, not the best example, but could be partially due to I guess it wouldn't be necessarily be an extinction burst here because they're still getting the same reinforcement. So if food was used here, food was used here. So, but then they did throw them into extinction. So they cut them off completely from whatever attention or food, and you can see it ended up maintaining. So
Now, I can't figure out why sometimes they will go further with one person and not, like Susan seems like the person who they would target the most to try to get extinction with.
yeah,
Why is she left alone and the other two,
Yeah.
like-
I mean I can understand why they cut Julia off.
Yeah, she's doing fine, yeah.
And Matt, I can understand, they probably went and then they had this hiccup and they're like, well, let's
What's
keep
going on?
going, and he kept going. But yeah, I'm not sure why Susan, it's possible maybe Susan dropped out of the study at this point.
Oh.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's unfortunately not always the lab,
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
tell you these things, that's
Yeah.
the thing, they just.
yeah. And this one might say it in the actual article, I can pull up and find out, but
I'm
I'm not
sure
sure.
this wasn't written by a clinical psychologist.
No, it definitely wasn't.
Yeah,
Definitely
I can tell you that.
So, yep.
Maybe, on the last one, could it be possible that he was like,
Touche.
satiated or something?
Oh, it's very possible. It could also be that, depending on what the setting was, maybe he was getting something outside of this clinical situation where he spiked up again because he's learning, I can do it in this one environment, let me keep trying, and he didn't necessarily discriminate in the two environments. So, yeah, we're not entirely sure. Either way, though, he's significantly lower than he was up here. So, and then did, probably drop down to, most of these are probably 0 to 0.5. So, yeah. So, in this, so let me talk, I guess, a little bit about what the non-contingent reinforcement actually would look like in this experiment. So let's say it's Julia. So let's say Julia's target behavior is physical aggression. So she's chilling out, whatever, at the playground. She really wants the staff's attention, so she comes up and just kicks the back leg of the staff, and they're like, Julia, you need to knock it off, you need to come with me, and go down to the principal's office, whatever it may be. So she's getting social reinforcement for that maladaptive behavior. So what they would do is they'd identify the interval that she needs to be reinforced, and they would say, okay, you know, after 2 minutes, we're gonna go find Julia, and we're gonna give her attention no matter what. So she's out on the swing, and they go, hey, Julia, you're doing a great job. You know, is there anything you want? Julia's, no, that's fine, whatever. And then they go, 2 minutes later, they come back. So 2 minutes, they come back, and Julia's on the swing. Hey, good job, Julia, nice work. They go away. Minute and a half later, Julie comes up and bam, kicks the back leg of the staff member. They ignore her. She just starts kicking and kicking and kicking. 2 minute mark hits. Hey, Julia, how you doing? And gives her social attention, even though she's engaged in that maladaptive behavior. The idea is that no matter what she's doing, they're going to reinforce her. And so hopefully the concept is that you're going to catch Julia being good more than you're going to catch her being bad, and that eventually you'll reinforce her and she realizes that I don't need to engage in maladaptive behavior, I can just engage in whatever behavior. So
that's the principle of non-contingent.
reinforcement is that you're providing whatever was maintaining that consequence unconditionally. So in the hopes that the behavior will decrease. So in this case, this would be NCR with positive reinforcement. So they're giving food, attention. So, or I should say actually positive punishment to be very precise. So, yeah. But they would call it NCR plus. So, all right, does that make sense? Anyone want to attempt the next graph, or you want me to explain it? Takers.
Let's try it.
Okay. Well, we can do it as a class. All right. So I'll give you the background. This is not in your book, so you can search away. They mentioned the study though in your book, but they don't have the graph in there. So this is the Kodak, Miltenberger, and Romaniuk, 2003. This is NCR with negative reinforcement. So what they were looking at here, the target behavior that they were looking at is compliance in this situation. Well, I shouldn't say that. They called their target behavior compliance. What this graph is actually looking at is the problem behavior, which is resisting prompts, throwing materials, and hitting. All right? So I'm going to stop there, and I'll give you a few things later. So looking at that graph, I'm going to give you some acronyms here. So this is non-contingent reinforcement with escape. This is differential non-contingent reinforcement of other behavior. Yeah, so differential negative reinforcement of other behavior. NC is non-contingent escape. So what can you tell me about this graph? Anything. Just start throwing things out.
Two raters.
Two raters,
For
okay.
for both baseline and intervention.
Yep, so they had therapist 1, therapist 2.
Extinction burst.
Yes, I would definitely say there in John, the top one, there was an extinction burst, absolutely.
They didn't always split.
The differential negative reinforcement with other behavior was more effective. Can you say
So
that?
the DNRO,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, I would say they were both effective, but yeah.
Well, if one comes right after the other, how do you know which one was more effective necessarily?
That is an issue, yes, absolutely.
That's an excellent point.
So, yeah, it's like an alternating treatment design every session, which is a little weird.
And to tease that out, you'd have to take one at a time.
Yeah.
And do maybe ABA type of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is actually built off of other studies where they had done NCE alone and DNRO alone, and they were trying to, if you combine the two, can you get it to be
Oh.
faster? So that was kind of the basis of this study. But yeah, it's hard to say one's better than the other.
One and the opposite. Okay.
Yeah.
So
what's the difference between MC and DNRO? This differential negative reinforcement is also escape.
So that's part of what the therapist was trying to determine here.
So you're using the same way but different names?
Not entirely. So the non-contingent escape was they would, so they'd be working on something, the timer would hit and they would just let them go. The DNRO was more of a, they engaged in the activity for a while. If the target behavior didn't occur, then they were released. If it did occur, the timer would restart. So they were similar, but not quite the same. So, yeah.
Little unclear on how using a timer is non-contingent escape.
So in this case, the setting, the student would be, well, these two would be working, and then they would throw their materials or hit someone, and in the baseline phase, the therapist would be like, oh, you're done, just, take off.
Do whatever.
Yeah. So, and actually, so I'll give you a little more background information now. So what happened was, the therapist that was working with them believed that the behaviors were being caused to get social attention. And so they would be working and they thought throwing the materials or hitting, they were trying to get that therapist's attention. So what these individuals, the experimenters, came in and said, no, this is escape behavior, not attention-seeking behavior. So, which is why they put in the non-contingent escape. So they would set the timer for 5 minutes, the kid had to work 5 minutes. Whether they were hitting, the therapist, doesn't matter. As soon as that 5-minute timer went off, that's when the kid was allowed to go. So, yeah, and that's why they would use a timer.
So as they were able to escape, the behavior diminished.
Yeah, as soon as they realized my behavior isn't gonna change how I get out of this work, it's strictly according to that fixed interval timer. So, yeah. And what it didn't happen here because I'm pretty sure, oh, no, I take that back. So what they started with was actually escape every 10 seconds. So, and then they eventually were able to thin it to 2 minutes. So the timer was set for 2 minutes and then the kid could go. Which might be why here they were fine during several sessions and then it increased, is because they may have increased the timer. And the kid was like, whoa, I thought I could leave after 10 seconds and it's been like 20 seconds. So, but more likely this is an extinction burst. So.
I thought I read something where they let the kids have like unlimited access to something. Is that not non-contingent reinforcement?
Typically that, when they're talking about that, that's when they're assessing for the function of the behavior. So they'll give them unlimited access to see if, there's self-stimulatory behavior. They talk about like, I don't know if Paul or anybody talked about the FAST, the functional assessment screening tool. Okay. Detail. So that's just a questionnaire where you go, you give it to someone and they would circle yes, no, does these behaviors occur in the presence of work, in the presence of people? And then from there you can kind of guess, I think the functions are such and such, and you can then test for it and say, let's say someone theorizes that it's escape behavior. So they would say, here's your work. When you finish this, you can go, play with your toys or whatever. And they would put the kid there, and they wouldn't pay attention. And if the kid finishes the work and goes to play with toys, never interacting with you, you can say, all right, they're not having these behaviors for social attention, whatever. Or you say, there's a toy, have fun. And you kind of stand there and the kid's playing, but then comes up and kicks you. You can say, all right, it's not, escape behavior. It's, has to do with attention. So there's ways to kind of manipulate the setting just to determine what your function is. So, yeah. So, let's see, anything I want to point out here? Yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. Like, someone did say, they alternated between the NCE, then the DNRO, then the NCE, DNRO. So it gets kind of confusing, but like I said, the purpose was to say, in conjunction, do these two, decrease the target behaviors. So, and this graph in the article, never mind. This is the other part of the graph. So they also looked at percent compliance in sessions. So
Say again, percent what?
percent compliance.
Oh,
So
oh, okay.
how often do
Okay.
they, sit and do their work? And you can see obviously that it increased. So, yeah. But in this case, this was more not necessarily related to maintaining consequence of escape behavior. So that's why we could say this technically would be, I guess negative reinforcement because we're removing the need to work and the behavior increases. So, but the procedure, the intervention was specifically targeting maladaptive behaviors with the NCR intervention. So, does that make sense? All right, couple cents, no dollars, good enough.
This is a question.
Absolutely.
Top chart?
Yep.
The baseline is like, is this maladaptive?
This is compliant behavior.
Compliant behavior?
So
Okay.
John very rarely followed directions.
Okay.
So,
Is it fair to say on the bottom one, that compared to the baseline, there was an increase, but not nearly as dramatic as the top one?
yeah, absolutely. You could definitely say that. Yeah. I mean, his average, really not that much difference
Yeah.
in compliant behavior. So, however, if we go back and look at the previous one for Andy, his maladaptive behaviors definitely dropped.
Okay.
So he may not necessarily be following directions,
But he's not
doing his
hitting it.
work, but he's not hitting, kicking, throwing the materials
Okay.
anymore either. So. All right, what's going backwards, wrong way. All right, so here we got Julie and Laura. This one is in your book, and this is non-contingent reinforcement for automatic reinforcement. So this actually would kind of go into your giving access to free play. So they're allowed to get out of whatever they were in and just go stim away or manipulate objects in front of their face, whatever it may be. So typically with this, you're trying to decrease that self-stimulatory behavior by making them have longer and longer sessions. So, so in this case, self-injurious behavior for good old Julie. And once again, I'm explaining the graph. I should let you guys do it. So, what can you pick out about this?
So the dark circles represent again
Anybody? Self-injurious behavior. Yep.
and the empty circles? Oh, I hope they must be,
Yep.
Or should we just
Sorry.
constantly,
I'm tired. I'm sorry.
constantly keys instead of the,
And
You can tell that they like spread it out over because the top is 3 months and 12 months. I feel like usually the studies happen quickly.
yeah, typically, and you'll see that a lot actually with any sort of self-injurious, any self-stimming, self-injurious behaviors. Since a lot of that reinforcement is typically intrinsic, so we theorize that they're probably getting some sort of release of endorphins. It is much harder to break. I mean, it's like breaking a nicotine habit versus, scratching your chin habit. So,
Would the object manipulation be like spinning a whatever?
probably playing with the toys, something more appropriate than banging your head on the desk.
Okay,
Yeah.
So why does the object manipulation don't have a baseline?
I was wondering actually the same thing. You would think that they'd at least show that when put in the play area or whatever, that they would never interact. Because it is kind of misleading. You don't know, maybe they were already playing with those objects So I definitely agree with you. And I think partially because what they did determine was they wanted to focus on the target behavior of SIB, but without having some replacement behavior, then you're kind of at a loss. So they said, instead of banging your head on the desk, we're gonna, teach you to spin a top.
Or are you using like the high P or low P, like bundle them together?
Probably in this case, I would say it's a high probability they're self-injurious. In this case, my guess is probably low. But who did this study? I don't have it written down. We did a similar study in my graduate program where it wasn't necessarily high or low probability. We actually did what was called a conditioning study. So what we did was we took coloring, playing with a certain toy, and looking at books as our object manipulation, and we paired those as reinforcers. And so basically we taught them, instead of getting self-reinforcement from self-injurious behavior, you're going to enjoy coloring instead. So, yeah, and so that may be why is that they just said, here, there's nothing they're gravitating towards, so we're going to teach them to like something. So it was kind of a creepy study to say, all right, I had 5 subjects, and I said, all right, those 2 are going to like books by the end of the semester, that one's going to like color, and those 2 are going to play with this particular toy. And sure enough, yeah, like 4 out of 5 did exactly that. We put them in a play area, and the 2 would go towards the coloring, 1 would go towards, books or whatever. So.
I have a question about the color pairing. I saw like lots of journal article they mentioned about color pairing for assessment, but I don't understand why they use that. For the color pairing.
Color pairing? Instead of, in regards to what were they looking at as the target behavior they were trying to?
The chaining, the article you give us, there's one article say like they use that for pre-assessment to see that if the children have the preferred color or not, but I don't understand why they use that in the chaining program for like pairing with color.
Maybe because I'd have to go back and take a look at the article. In regards to chaining, there were a couple articles too that I think I put in the wrong folders. So it may be in the chaining folder, it wasn't actually a chaining procedure. Did they mention chaining in the article?
Like that.
Okay, good. So, yeah. It's possible what they have to do is go through all the steps of what coloring entails, is like picking out the coloring book and getting the crayon and then sitting down at the table, and they may have just taught the different sequences to that.
Yes, but why? Because if the children say, I hate the gray chair, so you need to remove the gray chair in that laboratory or something, so you need to like pre-assessment from the laboratory, or I'm not sure about why.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally follow on what you're asking, I think.
Yes, for that pre-assessment, it's like they test for the children, like to see what color they prefer.
Okay.
And later they develop the schedules, and they say something like, I'm lost in somewhere like why they need that color pre-assessment to relate to the training program, because I don't see the connection.
They may have done it just to try to get some reinforcers. So they may have said, this kid likes this color, and we'll put together a visual schedule with that color, or they like red gummy bears, whatever it may be.
So it would make it easier to chain?
Yeah, it would provide a reinforcer that they knew the kid would like.
In one article I reviewed last year, they were trying to teach children to associate one thing with one color and another thing with another color, and another thing with another color,
Okay.
so that they could actually ask for something based on the color that they chose. So I don't know if that's what was happening in that article or not.
Yeah.
But sometimes teaching and association is important for
Right.
maybe a precursor to the chain process.
And that may have been looking at stimulus classes as well, as here's
Yeah.
yellow things or
Yeah.
orange things. It may also have been looking at future functional communication training where,
So like he's wearing a brown shirt tonight, that means he's gonna let us out early.
Oh,
So
okay.
anytime he wears brown, he lets us out early.
Shopping's going
White is all about green.
But see, if it's blue next time, it's the same thing, you know, I mean.
Generalize.
Yeah, it's just a shirt.
exactly.
Okay.
All right, so effective use of NCR. In order to make this applicable and hopefully, useful, you really have to manipulate and maintain and control whatever was positively reinforcing those behaviors before. So if it's, if they're getting attention, you need to be able to stop that attention and only deliver it when you want it. Which is why with the automatic reinforcement, it's so much more difficult to do because it's really hard to stop hand flapping or toe tapping or some other behaviors like tongue clicking. I mean, you're not going to be able to hold their tongue and be like, all right, 2 minutes is up, and let it go. So you really have to be able to actually control whatever that maintaining reinforcer actually is. So, let's see. I have a lot more things in my notes than I do on the slide here. Interesting. So, I don't even have the next step in my notes here, but anyway, functional behavioral assessment. Obviously, you want to be able to determine what the function of the behavior is so you can identify what that maintaining reinforcer is. You want to emphasize non-contingent reinforcement with the staff that's working with the individual. So if you're going to put them on NCR, make sure that that staff knows, don't give this kid attention or don't give them edibles, please, unless it fits with that schedule. Otherwise, you're going to go right back to a variable schedule of reinforcement, which is going to make things even worse when you try to go back to your intervention again. So, see, with time-based NCR, you want to make sure that your time is not too short or not too long. So, especially if you're dealing with some sort of physically aggressive kid, you don't want to be like, all right, they physically aggress every 30 seconds, so let's put them on an NCR of every 5 minutes. You're going to be black and blue after the first 2 minutes. So you want, going along with that, you want to make sure that your schedules of reinforcement are thinned appropriately and you're not just making big jumps. So, and then you want to know what your terminal criterion is. So, is it that you want the kid to be in that activity for 20 minutes or, are they standing out of line at Disneyland and it's going to be 3 hours? So whatever it may be. So figure out what you want your terminal criterion to be and thin your schedule up to that point. Okay. So, all right. So this is your book, Advantages and Disadvantages. I try to tell this to everybody in my entire life that everything comes with pros and cons. So you just have to accept that. So some advantages is that it's easy to apply. So for a classroom situation, I could easily say, my little motivator buzzes at 5 minutes and I say, hey, Myra, you can go out and play on the playground. So it's very easy because it can be set on a fixed schedule. And usually a fixed schedule is much better with an NCR than trying to do a variable schedule. So it typically creates a positive learning environment in that the student gets access to what they want. Whereas like extinction, you're cutting them off from that reinforcer. So they may go through complete anguish. So think of a nicotine addict. You don't want to put them on extinction because that extinction burst, they'll go through 3 cases a day. So whereas you say, oh, go take your smoke break and then slowly thin that schedule out. So a package treatment that includes NCR with extinction may reduce extinction-induced response bursts. So last week when we talked about, sometimes if the kid has a, behavior of throwing his materials on the ground and you say, all right, we're going to go into extinction and we're not going to let him out, he may aggress and become more violent. by doing NCR, it kind of gives you your outs of, all right, he's going to aggress, but he's going to be able to get out of that before he aggresses. So using this in combo is a useful thing. And then sometimes you just get that, chance pairing. So, and ideally you want to make sure your ratio of the chance pairing is for appropriate behaviors is higher than your maladaptive behaviors. So you don't want to NCR him every time he's kicking you. You want to catch him working more times than kicking you. So, so some of the disadvantages that sometimes the NCR may actually reduce the motivation to engage in that, adaptive behavior. So if you're working on a replacement behavior, and you're constantly giving them access to, their cigarette, they may eventually be like, I don't care anymore about cigarettes, so I'm not going to do what you do or want me to do. So you get some of that reduced motivation. Like I said, you sometimes have chance pairings of problem behaviors. So, and then NCR escape, if it's in a classroom situation, like I said, Myra, you can go play on the playground, and she goes out there for 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes of instructional time she completely missed that the rest of the class got. So there's that disadvantage. So, all right. So before we move on to the next slide, we'll wait till Myra gets back from the playground.
Are you back?
All right. So,
One more minute.
so in this activity, I was going to have you guys pair up once again. We're going to pick a behavior that your colleague can do. Identify a corresponding target behavior, so some replacement behavior, and then you're going to identify whatever antecedent is maintaining that consequence. And I'm not sure we're actually going to go through this activity. I'm not sure how beneficial it will be. And I was going to have you guys implement an appropriate NCR procedure. So, Dora would be there typing, and Jerry would have her on like 30 seconds. So, yeah. And so you'd say, okay, here's your coffee or tea or whatever, and gives it to her. Okay, good. So, assuming that it was just she's poking him to get access to her tea. Do you guys want to try an NCR activity, or should we just move on?
That's good.
You got it? Sounds good. All right, well that puts us halfway through our presentation already then tonight. So, all right, let's talk about high probability request sequence. A big term for a very easy process. This is the presentation of a series of easy to follow requests for which the participant has a history of compliance followed by low probability requests. So the idea is that there's ablative effects where it reduces the value of a reinforcement for a non-compliance to that low request. So they typically get out of whatever it is they don't want to do. And hopefully it reduces aggression, self-injurious behavior when you ask them to do something. So, for example, let's say that, we'll pick on Josh. Is it okay if I pick on you?
Yeah.
All right. Josh hates wearing his raincoat when it's whenever. He just hates wearing a raincoat. So it's raining out, which it doesn't happen in Southern California, but let's say he's in Seattle. And so his mom says, Josh, you gotta put your raincoat on or you're gonna get sick. And so she goes towards him with the raincoat, and he flips out and goes, ah, and bites around the head. She's like, never mind, I'm not gonna deal with this raincoat, whatever it may be. So that is a low probability request, is that he's not gonna wear his raincoat. So what we could easily do is we would go up to Josh and we'd be like, find some things that Josh really likes doing. Josh loves the social attention and loves like following simple commands. And so we would get Josh into going, hey Josh, touch your head. All right, clap your hands. All right, stomp your feet, Josh. He stomps his feet. We say, put your raincoat on. And he's so caught up in it, he puts his raincoat on. And we're like, great job, Josh. Here's a whole Kit Kat bar. So it's kind of get them into that swing of things. I like to kind of call it the Simon Says method, is that you get people going. Simon says, touch your nose. Simon says, clap your hands. Simon says, stomp your feet. All right, raise your hand. And people still raise their hand. And you're like, oh, Simon didn't say. You get them so caught up in the moment that they lose track of, I want to be non-compliant.
Behavioral momentum.
Not necessarily, because the pre-MAC principle states that you do this low-level behavior first, and then you get access to a high, to your reinforcer.
Is it something like shaping?
You can use it towards shaping, but usually shaping is gradual steps to your terminal behavior. This you're using behaviors that aren't even necessarily related to your terminal behavior. So let me address pre-MAC, then I'll address shaping. I'll hopefully clarify that for you guys. So pre-MAC principle, remember, it's typically called Grandma's Law. You know, you eat your veggies, you get your cookies. The if then. In this case, Josh doesn't have to touch his head. He doesn't have to clap his hands. And typically with Grandma's Law, pre-MAC principle, you're doing the non-compliant behavior first and then the compliant behavior. With this, you're switching it around. You're doing things that are compliant first, hoping that you catch them in the moment to do the non-compliant. Does that make sense for the pre-MAC? How they're different? All right. Now shaping. So if we want to teach him to put his raincoat on, and usually shaping is used when it's new knowledge. It would be Josh holds his raincoat. Great job, Josh. You know, you're getting close to that terminal behavior. I'll help you the rest of the way. So shaping is more like that chain. So next time, we're hoping he gets his left arm in. Hey, that's good enough. Go outside. He goes out with just his left arm, his raincoat. Yeah, it comes back with his shirt also. But next time we'd hope he put both arms in and he's woo, flipping around. So they went, but hopefully down the road we'll have everything on. We could use it in conjunction with shaping, where if it is a really complex skill like getting your whole raincoat on, button, and the hood on, we could just say, hey Josh, stomp your feet, clap your hands, put your left arm in, and leave it at that. And so we would be using this in conjunction with shaping. So, and that's absolutely a really good method to do. So, does that, oh, go ahead.
Do you think the example given by the textbook is a good one? Like,
I don't even know what they
teacher
gave.
said, give me 5, and the student just slapped her hand and his hand, and then teacher said, now take this ball and put in your pocket. I was like, the give me 5 and put a ball in the pocket is not even relevant to each other.
Right, and that's what this is that they're not relevant to each other. Touching his head has nothing to do with putting his raincoat on.
Okay.
Same with clapping his hands, stomping his feet. These are doing things, they're steps that you know he already knows how to do and likes to do, yeah. So, and like I said, I learned this as, and you'll see it a lot more in the literature, as behavioral momentum. You just kind of get that train going, and it's going so fast the kid doesn't stop. So, yeah. One of the, my opinion, one of the coolest studies I've ever seen on this, and I've only seen it effective on one kid, and I've messed around with lots of kids on trying to do it. One of my professors used this method to teach kids how to talk. So these kids learned gross motor imitation. They were able to mimic whatever, never vocalized a word. So what she did was she took, and this is kind of like the shaping piece of it, where she'd have them like stomp their feet, and then, you know, pat their stomach, and then touch their shoulders, and then touch their lips, and then she would say their name, and some of them started blurting their names out. Never talked before, just started saying, Connor! And she was like, all right, check. So she kind of got them moving, and they started speaking. So like I said, I've only seen that successful with one student I've ever tried to do it with, and I've tried to do it with lots of students. So I don't think it's overly effective for many individuals, but it was very cool. I was like, whoa. And it wasn't like perfectly clear, it was still garbled, but you could definitely say it was closer when they uttered something. And then from there, we knew they had the ability to talk, and we started shaping their language around that. So, yeah. So some effective use of high probability. So things, selection of responses from current repertoire. So you find things that they already know how to do. Use, spit it out as fast as you can. It's not effective if you say, Josh, tap your head. And then I continue talking about all these other steps, and then I say, Josh, stomp your feet. And then I talk about more, and then I say, oh, Josh, put your raincoat on. It has to be in rapid succession with each other. So, you have to obviously acknowledge compliance. So after each step, so he touches his head, great job, good work, whatever. Otherwise, they will lose that kind of motivation of, I'm not getting my positive reinforcement that I'm looking for. And then obviously, you want to use some real potent reinforcers, especially for that terminal behavior. So what you eventually want them to do, if they actually do it, give them that toy truck, whatever it may be, or give them that pack of cigarettes. So, yeah. So, there's something else I was going to add to this, but I don't remember what it was. So, oh well.
Have you,
Sanity.
question.
Yeah.
Obviously you worked a lot with pervasive developmental disorders and all that. Have you worked with someone with behavioral issues related to ADHD or anything like that?
Yeah. I don't use this as much with ADHD individuals, but it is somewhat useful, which is why you have to do the rapidity of requests, because otherwise they'll be, tapping their head and, ooh, squirrel. You lose it. So you gotta kind of keep moving on it. It is really effective. I've used this a lot with ED students. So, kid's pissed at, doesn't like his algebra homework, tears it to pieces and throws it all over the floor. As a behavior analyst, there has to be some sort of consequence. You've got to pick this up. F that, I'm not picking this up. All right, give them some time. You come back and you're like, hey, you want to play a game? Yeah, whatever. Okay, give me a high five. Sweet. Can you do it down low? Awesome. All right, can you grab that piece of paper? Yeah. Let's shoot in the basket. Boom. And you just tie it into things. And eventually they're like, hey, good job cleaning up. They're like, F you. You did it.
So what proportion is it between the PDDs and the ADHDs and the conduct/oppositional defiant? I mean, from your experience.
From what that I work with?
What proportion would you divide it up in
right
terms of
now,
what
I'd say right now I'm probably more 60% of like the ED, CD,
okay.
and
Okay.
40% autism.
you see? Okay. Interesting.
In my internship, we had to rotate through different fields, so
That's
I had to go through a middle school of all ED and conduct disorder kids.
Okay.
And then I had to go through like early intervention of autism, and then elementary autism, and then so.
But after, last question.
Yeah.
After, since it's primarily the ED or the conduct or whatever,
Yeah.
After they get through that FU thing, is there that bonding that takes place, and now
Well,
they're more with you type of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of those kids,
Yeah,
they crave that structure and
Yeah.
really want that contingency.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah, and you've almost gained the respect by.
tricking them.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit. It's more, I think I gain their respect more because what I say, I follow through with.
Okay.
And they know then if I say, hey, we're gonna have a pizza party tomorrow, they know I'm gonna have a pizza party with them. Or, hey, you got in trouble, I gotta do this, and they understand, yeah. That a lot of those, that consistency is huge for them.
Yeah.
And then once again, just going back to the basic principles of behavior analysis, is that it's for them positive reinforcement to get that attention and feedback versus
Right.
no consequence whatsoever.
Right.
So, yeah.
And you may be the only one doing that.
Yeah, which can be much more difficult, which is why I try to, the district I work with autism classrooms, moderate to severe autism, so intellectually disabled autism, as well as what we call a behavior intervention, which has her emotional disturbance and conduct disorder kids. And then I have a bunch of like gen ed teachers and staff that I also do ABA stuff with.
On the staff.
On the staff, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I don't need a release of information and sign consent from them. So, yeah.
Is it possible for us to have like, I don't want to say like a cheat sheet, but something that could tell us what interventions work well for what populations.
Populations.
Kind of a best
Or-
practice type of thing.
Or does it,
Yeah.
or because like it's individualized, would not work that way?
It does and it doesn't. It's best taking a look at the function of the behavior first, identifying what that function is, and then finding an intervention that will tie into either the replacement behavior, negating that maladaptive behavior. And kind of goes back to, I think, the very first class where I want to teach you guys the theories of how all these work, because they do tie into so many different populations. I mean, you could theoretically use this behavioral momentum, when you're doing marketing and you want people to answer a question that you know is very uncomfortable for them. It's like,
But I've done it with clients, before, where you understand why this is important, right?
Yeah.
You kind of go like this,
Right,
right?
and
So
they-
it's
they-
hard for them to go no when you.
Right. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, you could fire off, what's your birthday, what's your name, what's your address, and then fire off some random question about, I don't know, like sexual behaviors, and they may answer it because you just fired off all these.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's a classic interrogation.
Mhm.
We use human lie detectors, that's like they always easy
Very
ask
fast
for,
and very
and then they throw you the slider, the
Yeah.
curveball, and it's a little hard to makes it harder to lie.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, so I can't really say, here's a cheat sheet, here's what you can use in that piece. I do have and this, I'll toss around how to do this for next quarter if I do teach. I have a list of about, I think it's 220 different tactics and strategies. And some of them I feel like overlap, like I think one says high probability responses and then another one says behavioral momentum. So some of them overlap. But I was kind of tossing around the idea of giving you guys a list of 220 and saying, all right, pick 10 and outline how this strategy is used, step by step sort of thing. So, and some of them won't be in the literature because some of them were specific to our grad school. Like we had something called the Learn Unit, which is essentially just, in my opinion, a discrete trial. So, but it's not anywhere in the literature, so they're very hard to find.
Hopefully last question.
Yeah.
What percentage of
68.
clients do you have that you think you didn't achieve what you hoped you would achieve in them? Obviously, you get a sense of what the goals would be, what are possible, and you
Yeah.
aim for what you can get, and there's limits to what you can get, but in terms of falling short of what you thought you could get, what percentage do you think?
That's tough to say.
Because I know you're getting something,
Yeah.
from everybody. I mean,
And you can't control parents'
Right.
behavior.
I was gonna say, a lot of it
Yeah.
comes down to the control that I have. I mean, I know I've had a couple kids in the district where I took those cases on personally, and I had much more success in saying, here's a plan, teacher or para, go implement it. So it's kind of hard to say. And yeah, I like to think that I have a pretty high success rate when I'm individually monitoring it. So, yeah. So, but I don't know. There's literature out there, at least in regards to like early intervention discrete trial, where you'll see numbers anywhere from like 40 to 60% of exiting from autism or rehabilitation of prisoners, whatever it may be. I don't know. I don't have a good percentage. I should probably start keeping track. It's tough though.
Good data.
It is good data to have.
You're busy enough, but.
Yeah. I think if I ever went up like private practice, I would absolutely keep track of that. Be like, here's the yearly goal I expect you to
Here's my
reach.
success rate. Ooh,
Yeah.
come to me.
Exactly. And I know we have what's called individual education plans where teachers and staff have to write year-long goals. And there was a period where I was monitoring how many goals were actually being met year in, year out. But then I realized that some of those staff were absolutely lying on the kids' success rate, and I was like, this is completely like falsified data, and I didn't feel comfortable maintaining that anymore. So, yeah. So it's really hard to do when you're controlling, which is why I like implement ABA strategies on staff. So,
Are
yeah.
you keeping data of that? Maybe we should know that.
I don't think either of you guys are involved in it. I will
What's
just.
my percentage?
I will disclose that it's been a probably 3-year process of a shaping behavior for my high school BI classes. They are very resilient, but I'm slowly getting them where I need them to be. So on this graph, we've got the target behavior here was non-compliance. So the number of responses, I'm assuming in a given amount of time, so probably like 20 minutes. So it's their target behavior, like I said, is non-compliant. The maintaining consequence for all of these students was probably escape, is what they said, probably. So the interventions, they used a 3 high probability followed by a low probability. So they would give them 3 quick steps followed by whatever that low step is. And then they recorded each of these as 10 responses. So this first session is 10 responses of, well, theoretically, the low probability. So typically if you're keeping data, so we're going to go back to that touch head, clap hands, stomp feet. You wouldn't record data on any of that. All you're looking at is then, did you put your raincoat on?
Okay.
So it is really, really funny to watch some newbies like try to keep track of all those different behaviors. They're like, clap your hand, stomp your feet, put your raincoat on. Oh no, wait. Let me start over. And you're like, don't even worry about it. Just go through the steps and hit the raincoat. That's all you have to worry about.
Okay.
So yeah, so don't ever fall into that newbie trick. So anyway, so they had the experimenter, they had a secondary trainer, so they had 2 people involved in this. But you can see very low probability for John here, maybe 40% of the time follow through that low request, maybe 25% for Barry, and William's all scattered about here, but probably about 45-ish. So then they implemented their sequence. So initially started off, see it's kind of jagged.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
So,
It's kind of jagged here,
but
not as
rising.
much.
Right.
What?
But
Yeah,
rising
rising.
and stabilizing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably slightly jagged. Typically when we look at data and we see this jaggedness, a lot of times this has to do with motivation issues.
It-
Okay.
Is the secondary trainer not as efficient at this thing? Or is that?
That's very possible. What's probably happening here as well is that this experimenter is delivering so much reinforcement that they're getting paired
With that experiment.
with that
versus the
experiment,
other one.
whereas the secondary one's rolling in and
Ah.
isn't as motivating to these individuals. But as you can see, it's still increasing.
This is
So,
true, this is true.
Yeah. So I suspect that's probably what went on there.
Well, when you're doing this, you can only do it with fast movements, like you couldn't say, do this, do this, do this, do your homework, like that.
Right.
Necessary.
Exactly. But you could do, like, do this, do this, do this.
What's
Answer question number 1. Good.
And then you have to start all over again
Yeah.
Yeah.
to get to question one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And typically you wouldn't do it necessarily in rapid succession of do this, do this, do this, low probability, do this, do this, do this. Because eventually you'll see that decrease in motivation and you'll see them say, I see what you're doing here. And so you might do the rapid succession and then give them a break for like 3 minutes and then you come back. So, yeah. So, yeah, when they say like we did 10 responses in a session, those 10 responses weren't necessarily dun 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 dun. It could have been over 3 hours and every 10 minutes they gave it to them. So,
Now, salesmen use that technique all the time.
Oh,
Right?
man.
They keep saying yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
No,
Oh,
ask
absolutely.
you, don't you want to buy this car?
exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, even after you bought the car, you're like, sign here, do you want the maintenance plan? Good, sign here, okay. You want us to put extra gas in? Okay, fine. Here, you want to buy the second car? Right. And you're like, whoa, yeah, you're absolutely right. So it just gets you moving. So, yeah, and so we leave it to the clinical psychologists to figure out why this works. All we know is that it works. That's all behavior analysts care about. All right. Any questions about that graph? Yeah. And actually, this is a good point with this one, and you'll see this obviously with reinforcement itself too. Is that all the maintenance stayed high; it didn't drop back down. So, yeah. And that's going back to, even though this technically is an antecedent intervention, this was still paired obviously with positive reinforcement following the admittance of that behavior. So, yeah. Yeah, like if we did this, clap your hands, touch your head, whatever, tie your shoe, but then we never reinforce the tie your shoe, we would see that maintenance down at the bottom. So,
I forgot, what do the dotted lines mean? Between somebody-
it's, I'm not sure quite why they would put a dotted line here. My guess would be it was over a certain amount of time. So like maybe there was a session in here that this student was absent maybe.
Okay.
That'd be my guess. But I know here, they just didn't connect the lines at all. So I'm not sure what the dotted line would be for. So it could also be that this person didn't know how to use their Microsoft Word very well. You will also, yeah, in Java, I'm not sure when this article came out, they were taking a lot of articles just to beef up their journal. And they were being,
Well, that's why you remember it's not a true one article.
yeah, exactly. They were like, yeah.
When
So,
you reinforce, do you only reinforce what you're trying to get them to do, or do you reinforce the whole sequence?
you reinforce the whole sequence because that keeps them motivated and moving. So if you don't, they will kind of slack off and be like, why am I even doing this? So yeah, you definitely want to reinforce as you go. Which also means that you have to be quick on giving the direction and the reinforcement.
So can you reinforce after, like, wow, you did all that really fast, or you're supposed to like,
No,
touch your head?
Clap your
Oh.
hands, good job.
so go back to that one. So you want to acknowledge the compliance. So let's say we're doing those 3 steps. Acknowledge it by usually just giving some sort of verbal praise, some, hey, you did that right piece of things. And then the potent reinforcer. So if you're giving out a Skittle, give out the Skittle for the one that they're very unlikely to do. So the other piece of this is that, let's say you're touch your head, clap your hands, stomp your feet. So he touches his head but doesn't clap his hands. You need to kind of stop your whole sequence and correct that behavior right there. And then, all right, let's try that again. Clap your hands and show them how to do it. And then go back to your sequence again. So, yeah.
So from the least intrusive to the, or how do they put it? You know,
The least
like
intrusive.
the guidance,
Yeah.
sometimes you have to help them, you know, if they don't know how to
Yeah.
do this part, right?
Well,
Least-
and you would only pick skills that they already have in their repertoire.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they already know how to do it.
Yeah, okay.
But you just want to give that quick feedback of, nope, clap your hands, remember? Oh, okay, good. All right, let's try that again. So, yep.
Quick question, what software are you using to draw the graphs? Like the one just showed?
What program do you use? I use Excel.
I was gonna say, it looks like an Excel export.
Yeah. I mean, this stuff may have come out in like 1995 when there wasn't a whole lot of choice to what you could use. Whatever you're comfortable using as your graph. So, and there are some things like your face line should be solid, and you should have obviously some sort of label on the side. So there's certain things you want to make sure are in your graph, but it doesn't matter what program you use. So, yeah. All right. So we could do, excuse me. We could do a quick activity where, but like I said, it would be like a Simon Says activity where your partner would be get you to all do these things, and then they would throw out something that you're a little more unlikely to do. So,
I got a question. When I was in the Army, we played a game in basic training called Drill Sergeant Says.
Okay.
And if you weren't out, you just had to do 20 push-ups. How would, obviously,
That would be like,
Wait, if you weren't out?
I'm sorry?
You said if you weren't out, you'd have to do.
Yeah, if you did a behavior that didn't
That wasn't-
start with Drill Sergeant Says,
Okay.
you had to do 20 push-ups.
Oh, okay.
That, obviously, you're not being given something nice, you're not given time off, so that would be what, negative?
It depends if your behavior is increasing or decreasing. Are you listening more towards what they're saying?
Well, it was basically in drills, right
Right,
face, left
right.
face, about face.
Yeah.
Drill sergeant says left face, drill sergeant says right face, about face. Well, if you stayed still, that's as good as you get, you stood still.
Right.
But you were punished, you
Right.
know.
So let's say initially in the first game of drill sergeant, you get 40% of the directions,
and you went up to 60.
and then you went up to 60, and then 80. So your behavior, your compliant behavior is increasing because something was put in place. You have to do push-ups. So technically, that would be positive reinforcement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now, if you said, "Never mind, I'm gonna go MIA," then you're looking at positive punishment. Something was put in place that your behavior just said, "Forget it, I'm
That was
done."
the stockade, so.
Yeah.
I have a
So.
question.
Yep.
So for all of this ones, we pretty much based on the end result. If it increases behavior, if it decreases behavior.
Absolutely.
And then if our initial hypothesis was this reinforcement or lack of, it's going to increase behavior, but it was the opposite, do we just state that it had the opposite effects as a result?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You know, which is why going into a classroom a lot of times, you know, teachers will send a kid to the office thinking that's punishment procedure, but we can show the frequency of their behavior increases. And we're like, you're really actually reinforcing this kid for his bad behavior. And teachers have a hard time, you know, grasping that because they don't think of it in terms of the end results. They look at it as, you know, for me, this would be a punishment. You know, they look at it as the act is what defines
Or
it.
they feel good because they got rid of the problem.
Oh, yeah, it's positive reinforcement for them,
Exactly.
absolutely, or negative reinforcement for them,
Yeah.
yeah, so. All right, I'm gonna, wow, you guys are gonna get up so early tonight, I'm sorry.
We are too, man.
Hey, get a start on a 4-day weekend rather than 3 days. So,
For you guys,
I know.
I gotta go tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
I definitely can't call out sick, I got 2 cases I gotta go to tomorrow.
Oh, man.
So, all right. So, like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about functional communication training, but the idea with this, we talked about it. I can't remember what section we talked about it in now, but we talked about the PECs. Shaping. We talked about shaping. But basically, the idea is that you're teaching someone to talk through pictures or an iPad, whatever it may be, and so they have this device or book, and they're going to give you a picture, and that's their way of communicating. So, I guess they put in this section because this becomes the new SD for their behavior. So instead of kicking, spitting, whatever it may be, the idea is that now they have this book that they say, I want something, instead of spitting until I get it, I can pull this picture off. So I guess that's why they put it in the antecedent intervention. But you have to have a dense schedule of reinforcement, and I'm not sure if you guys probably haven't talked about man training yet.
We talked a
Little bit? Oh, okay. So this is essentially what it is man training. As soon as they use that communication, you give them that item. So it's considered a dense schedule of reinforcement because it's an FR1 every time it happens. Bam. So you wouldn't ever thin this. So there's a decreased use of verbal prompts, so you're going to end up giving a lot more of the actual reinforcer and more of that, physical, pick up the picture, give it to me, that's what I want, versus saying, you know, pick the M&M, because they may have very little receptive language or discrimination visually. It is a behavior reduction procedure, so, you know, theoretically, it's reducing behavior, so it's punishment. But the idea is that they're no longer spitting because they're giving this picture to you, so, yep.
In the article that when I was reading, they were teaching the kids to ask for a break or to say no to a task when they needed a break. But then they did I guess, they chained it with, I think they call it chaining, where they would make them complete a task. A full task, and they add like another task before
Yep.
their request would be like honored.
The
Yep.
thinning,
Yeah.
So that,
And that would be tying in, I personally feel more like that pre-Mac principle
okay.
of, yes, you're thinning it because now you have to do A, and then you get B.
And they add.
A, B, and now you get C.
yeah.
So in this article, they called it chaining, but that's not what it is.
It could be, because as long as each of those steps is towards some terminal behavior. So let's say it's
They call it response chain.
response chaining. Okay. It's still, yeah, I see what they're saying. Yeah, so it's not the terminology where we use with forward and backwards chaining. It's more of what that rapid response piece of things, except it's not rapid. It's just, you get into this mode of I do this, and then I know I do this, and then I get whatever. And so it's kind of a delayed high sequence behavioral momentum
So
piece of
with
things.
that response chain training, is that still positive reinforcement like we were saying about other training, or is that like an antecedent?
Typically, that would be definitely a reinforcement procedure, because you're looking at them to complete that final task.
Okay.
And so it's probably, the completion rate's probably pretty low at first, and then you'll see the completion rate go up. So you see it get reinforced. So, yeah. So, in this case, the schedule thinning. With functional communication training, it's typically you start off with them giving you just the picture, and then you have them build into like a sentence strip, like I want M&Ms, and then I want red M&Ms. So they have to do a little bit more, and that might be what they're talking about in that response chaining piece of things too, is that they slowly build up the length of their sentence till you get essentially how we do, full sentence of, I want the green gummy bears, please. So, yeah. Does that make sense? All right, so let's take a look at this person, or peoples. So, so this is functional communication training. They had self-injurious behavior and physical aggression as their target behaviors. Their maintaining consequence was social positive reinforcement, either through attention or they were getting small bits of food. And then they, you know,
This is the first time I've seen histograms in there.
yeah.
That's interesting.
And I'm not sure what the histograms are necessarily showing here.
Yeah.
Trained response.
I guess in the center would be the dot, but.
Well, the dot's down below here.
Oh, I didn't even see the dot.
So, and the dot is the percentage of intervals that
Okay.
they did.
Huh.
I wonder if this is maybe the number of sessions they had to
Huh.
do. I'm not sure. I'd have to look this
Sometimes they
one up.
use those for ranges. So
Yeah,
between this and this, and then it can go all the way up to this.
maybe. Yeah. I'm wondering if this is like individual, like here it's just the picture, here is picture plus please. And so maybe these sessions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And they use challenging behavior instead of like target behavior or something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting too.
Well, the idea is that they were having physical aggression here.
Okay.
And so by teaching them to ask for what they want instead of physically aggressively, they were able to decrease the challenging behavior. So, And they probably just use challenging behavior as the generic because physical aggression, self-injurious behavior,
Okay.
you know, different
And
different response
kind
to
of broad
biographies.
term,
Are
yeah.
those,
Yeah.
what they referred to as hatched bars?
Yeah.
They said it's the percentage of intervals of unprompted communication by each student.
Okay.
Where did you say?
It's go on.
Unprompted communication, so the percentage of interval where communication was unprompted by each student.
Yeah. So here that they had a lot more where they just did more spontaneous. So okay, so yeah, so the bar graph is the replacement behavior essentially, and the dots is the target behavior. So yeah, so it is strange that they use a bar. Usually you use like an open circle
Yeah.
But
So-
how can they have the different behavior at the same time?
because you could still, you know, if they had to give a picture, you could still pick up the picture of the gummy bear and go whack, smack them across the head with it. So they could have the challenging behavior plus give the unprompted response.
Oh.
Where normally, most of these challenging behaviors, the kid would probably come after you. You would say, "Go, tell me what you want," and then that'd be a prompt.
So if you feel like they tell you like cross, like if they have aggression and they also did demand, so you like check like
Yep.
that.
Yeah, you can definitely have both because these are going back to last week. They're not incompatible behaviors, so they can do both. So
So it's something like someone say, okay, can I slap your face and then slap it?
if they actually had said that, yes, then I would probably count that as a correct correct response with a challenging behavior.
Then kick my knee.
Yeah. Absolutely. Strange case, but yes. So, all right, and let's get. So for this activity, I was gonna show you the PECs and the Proloquo, which you can easily, if you really want, you can pull those up online and see an example of people doing Proloquo. I have. If you want, I can show it to you now, but you know how much you guys love getting out early. You guys all look exhausted. Long week, yeah, it's only gonna get longer.
Because you're wearing a brown shirt.
I am wearing a brown shirt and brown shoes.
Yeah.
So next week I'll come in my
Yeah.
I'll come in my fatigues next week. It'll be an all brown and we'll really, all right, class, we're done. And we'll see. No wrong. Any questions tonight, tomorrow, next week?
Blessings, blessings, blessings.
All right, sounds good.
This is what we said on our check